wearing my lovely Huayavera shirt. I'm having a great time. It's Saturday night. It is well after dark here in New York City, and we are going to have a little conversation tonight. I must apologize in advance. My allergies are driving me crazy. It is a hot day here in New York City, but that's better than having it be, think it's October like it did last weekend. So I'm not complaining too much. So glad that you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Let's have a conversation. I'm so glad to engage with all of you. So glad to engage with all of you. And tonight, I have some interesting, short but interesting opening remarks for you. Then I'll answer your super chat questions. Before that, I will do the roll call. So that's how it works. Opening remarks, roll call, and then super chat questions. So your super chats make the show happen. It's Saturday evening. I'm here to engage with you politically. A lot of exciting things are in the works. It looks like the next Center for Political Innovation web conference is going to be on July 10th. So that's going to be very exciting. Some great presentations are planned. And some new things are in the works. Like I said, folks, we'll do the opening remarks. We will then do the roll call, and then from there I'll read your super chat questions and answer your super chat questions until the break of dawn. Not really. I'll probably run out of energy by then. But it'll be fun. I'm always happy to engage with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Post this on Reddit, post this on Twitter, post this on Facebook. The more of you that tweet this out, the more that post this on your Facebook, the better it is. So please do that. Please be sure to let folks know. Let folks know this conversation is happening. Bring them on board. They will not regret it. You all are here for some reason. I assume for some reason you stumbled from some dark corner of the internet. You stumbled on to this great conversation. And now you're still here. And you're not missing an episode. In fact, you're anticipating a conversation. So give someone else the rare opportunity that you had. Let someone else stumble into our little community and fall in love with what it is that we're doing here. Let someone else become part of the magic that is unnamed diet beverage, the magic that is a government of action that fights for working families, the magic of engaging with Marxism, Leninism, and socialism in the 21st century, right? We do something special here. This is not like anything else that you'll find on the internet, and help somebody else become part of what you are now part of. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, tweet this out. Let others be part of what class analysis calls a magical place. And it is that. It is definitely a magical place. There are some magical developments in the works. Yes, let other people stumble into our little corner of the world. Folks, I will be starting my opening remarks after I take a drink. So, folks, last night in the super chats, and when I was engaging with people, I was forced to make a very important distinction. A very important distinction. And it was only afterwards, it was as I was saying it and afterwards, that I was forced to reflect on how important it is to make this distinction. Folks, if you go around the world, you go to Latin America, you go to India, you go to Asia, Africa, you go to countries like Angola, Vietnam, you go to the Middle East, you go to Central America, communist parties and communist organizations have a very, very different way of relating to people. They have a very, very different way of relating to people and putting forward their message. Here in the United States, communists run around screaming revolution. Communists generally, if they raise a slogan, it's abolish the police, or it's burn it down, burn it down. If you ask communists what they believe, the answer that they give will be a very, very, we want to overthrow it all. It's not coherent. It's not very coherent. But if you go to countries where there is a strong communist party, that communist party will have an electoral program. They will have policies that they intend, if they get elected, to implement. Now, democracy in socialist America. But now people say, well, why do they want that? They are a revolutionary party, are they not? How can they advocate policies to make life better? How can they advocate policies to make life better if they want a revolution? Emotional blackmail, guilt tripping. How can they do that, right? And that this was the orientation of much of what you could call the new communist movement. And it's a pessimistic orientation. And the orientation that, in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of these young communists who had studied the works of Mao and Stalin and had become convinced that it was necessary to build a new communist party, they got jobs in factories. And what they basically did was try to become the most popular guy in the factory, become the most well-known when it came to baseball, be the guy that everyone wanted to go drinking with at the bar afterwards. And then the idea was that after, they would become very popular, and they'd be very well-loved in the plant because they knew lots about baseball and were very fun to have a beer with. After that, there would become some kind of crisis, and because they were popular guys working in the factory, there would become a revolutionary crisis, and the workers would turn to them for leadership, and then, Haitian Revolution impact on Louisiana Purchase. And because of that, the people, the workers in the plant would then follow the worker, the person who was the expert on baseball and the person who was the most fun with. They would follow them to tear the whole country down and destroy everything. And that was the strategy. And many of these young communists, Maoists, Trotskyites, they got jobs in factories under this strategy, and they would try to sell their co-workers copies of The Militant or The Revolutionary Worker or The Challenge newspaper, and largely their co-workers, IWW, their co-workers didn't want to hear it. They were largely uninterested in this proposal. But if you look at how the Communist Party of the United States operated during the 1930s, it didn't operate that way. It wasn't getting jobs in factories, trying to be the most popular. Okay. Rusted. I wrote it down. It wasn't about getting jobs in factories and trying to be the most popular person. It was rather putting forward the Communist Party's program. The Communist Party had a program that they put forward that would transition the country to socialism. And they knew that the capitalist bosses would not, would vehemently resist them implementing this program. If you read William Z. Foster's Towards Soviet America, which is a very good book, if you read anything put forward by the Communist Party during the 1930s, during the 40s, the 50s, they had an immediate program that if they were elected, they would implement. And that program would necessitate transitioning the country to socialism. And that was how they approached people. They didn't approach people saying, we want to tear it all down, we want to destroy everything. They approached people with a program, with something they wanted to implement, with actual policies that they wanted to implement. And I'll actually read to you. This is from The Twilight of World Capitalism. The Twilight of World Capitalism. Which is a very important book by William Z. Foster, the leader of the Communist Party of the United States. He wrote this book in 1948. And I will read to you what he explains about the Communist Party and its vision for the United States. Right? This is what William Z. Foster said in 1948 about what the Communist Party of the United States believed. In order for the people to put the United States firmly on the path toward peace, democracy, and the general well-being, the power of the monopolists who dominate our country must be curbed and finally broken, and the people themselves must take political charge under the leadership of the working class. The struggle for socialism grows inevitably out of the everyday fight of workers and their allies, especially against the present menaces of economic chaos, fascism, and war. The way our party foresees the possible development, in all good time, the American people, on the basis of their existing conditions, will decide how and in what forms they will introduce socialism. The way our party foresees the possible development of the future is along the following general lines. First, did I miss a super chat here? No, didn't miss a super chat. Wrote it down. Got the sex work one. Got the IWW one. Didn't miss it. First, we propose the regular election of a democratic coalition government based on a broad, united front combination of workers, small farmers, African Americans, professionals, small business groups, and other democratic elements who are ready to fight against monopoly, economic breakdown, fascism, and war. This type of a united front government could well have behind it the overwhelming majority of the people as it has in other lands. It goes without saying that the election of a democratic government could only be brought about in the face of a powerful and surely violent opposition from organized reaction. The whole history of the American class struggle is full of examples of employer violence in strikes and in other mass struggles, teaches this lesson with unmistakable clarity. The bitter attacks made against the Progressive Party, led by Henry Wallace during the 1948 elections, gave a sure indication of the frenzy and desperation with which the capitalists would confront a People's United Front combination that was strong enough to actually threaten their control of Congress and the presidency. Obviously, it would be an extremely difficult proposition to truly elect a democratic government in the face of this strong, violent, and reactionary opposition. Second, our party contends that such an anti-fascist, anti-war, democratic coalition government, once in power, would be compelled either to move left or die. With state power in its hands, it would be forced to pass from the more or less defensive program upon which it was elected to an offensive program. Confronted with the sabotage and open resistance of big business, it would have no alternative than this if it hoped to realize any progressive legislation of the program in order to ensure staying in power. A people's government would be forced to proceed directly to curb and undermine the power of the monopolies by adopting far-reaching policies of nationalization of the banks and of major industries, breaking up the big land holdings, the beginnings of the planned economy, the elimination of reactionary elements from the control of the army, the schools, and the industry, as well as various other measures to weaken monopoly and strengthen the working class as the leading progressive force in the nation. Third, a democratic, anti-fascist, anti-war government, under the violent attacks of the capitalists and in the efforts to find solutions to the burning economic and political problems, if it were to survive, would necessarily move leftward towards socialism, much as the people's democracies of Eastern and Central Europe are doing. Some liberals believe that a united front coalition government in this country would introduce a regime of progressive capitalism. But this is naive and a dangerous illusion. Capitalism is now in its monopoly stage and is hopelessly reactionary. Any people's government in our times, in order to be progressive or even to live, inevitably must move towards socialism. American socialism, beyond question, will have its own specific forms and methods, but basically it will be the same as socialism in other countries, with monopoly capital completely defeated, the industries and natural resources in the hands of the people, the production for general use instead of for profit, and the working class as the leader of the entire people. Only in this way will this country and the world be finally freed from the dangers of poverty, economic chaos, fascist slavery, and murderous war. These steps could be taken legally by a people's government, notwithstanding the opposition of the capitalists, however violent. To promote the election of a progressive coalition government of this type, which, by force of circumstances, would move left and eventually to socialism on the general pattern of European people's democracies, is obviously not to advocate a program of force and violence, the enemies of the Communist Party notwithstanding. The charge by the Department of Justice that our party advocates the forcible overthrow of the government is a brazen, conscious lie. The plain fact of the matter is that the communist movement in this country, as well as abroad, since the Seventh World Congress of 1937, has been going along on the practical working theory that in this period, because of the broad mass struggle against fascism and war, it has become possible in a whole number of democratic countries, including the United States, to legally elect democratic governments which could, by curbing and defeating capitalist violence, orient themselves in the direction of building socialism. Is it possible to elect such a democratic coalition anti-monopoly government in the United States, the stronghold of world capitalism? It is a sinister fact that civil rights in this country, notably since the end of the war, have been seriously whittled away. But the United States is by no means at the stage of fascism. Nor do we communists consider American fascism to be inevitable. The big popular upsurge in the recent presidential elections was a dramatic justification of our faith in the democratic strength of the American people. It showed a profound anti-fascist, anti-war sentiment among the masses. In the event of an economic crisis or a war, this mass democratic upsurge would be vastly greater and more clear-sighted. Our party's political line is thus based on the assumption that it is possible, under the present political conditions in the United States, for the broad masses of people, militantly led by the trade unions, and a strong mass political party to elect a coalition anti-monopoly government. How long this possibility may last in the face of fascist trends in this country is problematical. But if we should get fascism, if the United States were reduced to the level of fascist Spain, then the communists will also know how to reshape their policies to meet that kind of situation. And that is William Z. Foster explaining how the Communist Party, you heard, during the elections, 1948, in the middle of McCarthyism, at a time it was like practically illegal to be a communist, they went to the masses, they went to the American working class with a program to elect a democratic coalition government, an anti-monopoly government. That was William Z. Foster's formulation. An anti-monopoly government, right? And that during the 1920s and 30s, the Communist Party, they didn't call for an anti-monopoly government, they called for a workers' and farmers' government. A workers' and farmers' government. And my formulation in our time is I call for a government of action that will fight for working families. I have beaten the drum about that slogan over and over. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. But this raises the question, what would a government of action do? What would a government of action do? Now, I have given 4 dramatic steps, which I could repeat here, but I was thinking today about how important it is for the Center for Political Innovation, not just to develop our 4-point program, which we have, our 4-point program to rescue the country, our government of action. It's very important. But it's also important to have specific policy proposals to address specific crises. So first, let me go over, for those who may be new, The 4-point plan to rescue the country. Step number 1, we need a mass construction effort. We need to hire the millions of unemployed people and put them to work rebuilding the United States of America, rebuilding our bridges, our highways, our water treatment facilities, our power plants. We need a mass mobilization to completely rebuild the country. A mass infrastructure program, full employment, good wages for millions of people to be put to work, completely rebuilding America. Step number 1. Step number 2, right? In order to pay for it, natural resources, namely and most especially oil and natural gas, need to be made into public property. Public property, right? We need America's oil, America's coal, America's timber, America's natural gas. The profits from it should go into the public budget, not into the hands of private corporations. By being born in this country, you have a right to the soil and to the natural wealth, and no more should big international monopolies be enriching themselves off the natural wealth of the country. Public control of our natural resources. Step number 2. Step number 3, public control of banking. The lending of money should be in the hands of the state. No more private bankers, right? Bankers, they make money by having money. It's usury. Lending money at interest. They make money by having money. And as a result, because they don't actually create anything in the process of having their money, that also applies to Wall Street and the derivative ripoff schemes and speculation and Bitcoin and all of this, right? Because these folks make money by having money. Nothing actually gets created in the process. Because of that, they are astronomically richer than everyone else. They become the creditor class, and that needs to be gotten rid of. The lending of money should be done strategically in the interest of the country overall. The government should determine on a local level, on a state level, and on a federal level how credit is assigned. And credit should be assigned on the basis of what is good for the country. And then, on top of that, the revenue, the interest that's paid back should go into the public budget, right? If somebody wants to start a business, they should get credit from the state. And with their loan, they start their business, they make money, and then they pay it back, and that goes into the public budget, just like the profits from the oil and gas do. And that would solve our budget crisis immediately. Step number 4 would be the implementation of an economic Bill of Rights. The right to health care, the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to an education. These things should be considered human rights. And adding an economic Bill of Rights, much like what Roosevelt proposed, those 4 steps, right? Those 4 steps are the emergency proposal of the Center for Political Innovation to rescue the country. A government of action that fought for working families would take those 4 steps, rebuild the country, nationalize and put under public property the natural resources, put banking in the hands of the state so credit could be assigned strategically, and on top of that, enact an economic Bill of Rights. Those 4 steps would be the 4-point program to rescue the country. That's what a government of action would do, right? We know what the government of Joe Biden is doing. And we know what the government of Trump did. A government of action would be a government of getting things done, not a government of sleeping, not a government of sitting on its hands while the country crumbles, not do-nothing government, like Roosevelt said. No, we need a government of action that will fight for working families. That's what we need. But in addition to those 4 steps, there are a number of burning issues that are addressing the country right now, specific problems that we face as a society beyond the overall economic problems. And so it is the necessity of the Center for Political Innovation to put forward an economic program to address those problems. One of the biggest problems that we have in the world today is climate change, right? I don't need to get into specifics. Look outside, right? Climate change is a disaster. And the liberals are constantly beating the drum about how climate change is a disaster, and they're right. What is their solution? Got to get poorer. Everyone's got to get poorer, got to stop having children, degrowth. Well, that's not going to work. That is not the nature of mankind. Human beings are tool makers. The human beings are constantly, throughout their history, changing the way they relate to Mother Earth and Mother Nature, constantly changing their relationship. The first great ecological crisis we had was after many thousands of years of hunter-gatherer civilization. There was a great environmental catastrophe. Why? Because we were too good at hunting and gathering. We were too good. We had developed spears and rocks to hunt those animals. We had figured out patterns and how plants grew. And there was a shortage of plants and vegetation for us to eat. There was a shortage of animals to hunt down because we had gotten too good at hunting and gathering. And so what did we human beings do in the face of the first ecological crisis? Did we go, oh boy, I guess we should just stop having as many children. Let's all eat half as much as we do. That'll solve it. Let's degrow. Did we degrow our hunter-gatherer tribes? Is that how we solved the first great ecological crisis? Is that how we solved it? Did we do what Greta Thunberg wants us to do? Did we do what the Council on Foreign Relations and Joe Biden want us to do? Is that how we solved the first great ecological crisis? Did we look backward? Did we break apart our sticks and rocks and say, I guess we got to go back to, hunting down beasts with our hands? Oh boy. No, we didn't solve the first great ecological crisis of human history by going backwards. We solved the first great ecological crisis of human history, the shortage of animals, the shortage of edible fruits and inventing agriculture. We solved it by changing the way we interact with our environment and growing crops and domesticating animals. We used our creativity and our brilliance when we saw that the way we were interacting with Mother Earth, the way we were interacting with our environment wasn't working. We figured out a more effective way of doing it. We figured out a more efficient and more scientific way of doing it. That's how we solved the problem. 50 states into one big state. That's how we solved the problem. We used creativity. We used science. We used human brilliance, and we figured out that we could domesticate animals. We figured out that we could grow crops and plant seeds, and we advanced. That's how we solved the problem. And the great ecological crisis we face now of climate change, of the fossil fuels that we're burning, causing climate change and causing super hurricanes and disasters. Well, now it has become a necessity that we change the way we interact with our environment. And we're not going to do that by going backwards. We're not going to do that by becoming pessimistic. We're not going to do that by degrowing. So, I'll tell you how a government of action would deal with the crisis of climate change. You ready for this? A government of action would deal with the crisis of climate change by doing what Russia and China have already called for. All right, China reversing doubt. Fusion energy is the urgent necessity of the times. We have got to get fusion energy. So, a government of action would immediately sign a treaty with Russia and China and India and South Africa and every other major country to convene an emergency project to get fusion energy. And in order to conduct this project, we would build a city. We would build an entire city in Iowa or Nebraska. It would have to be in the center of the United States. And we would fly in as quickly as possible all of the greatest scientists, nuclear physicists, engineers, fly them to Nebraska. And we would build Fusion City in Nebraska or in Iowa. Fusion City. And all the Chinese companies would be flown in. All the Russian companies would be flown in. Our top nuclear power and fusion companies would be flown in. All the greatest scientists and engineers would all be flown in to Fusion City, which would be located in the heartland of the United States of America. And every effort would be put in to get fusion energy as quickly as possible. This would make the Manhattan Project to create the destructive atomic bomb look like child's play. We would erect Fusion City in the center, in the exact center of the United States of America, and put every effort and combine the strengths of every major country in the world to, in Fusion City, do what needs to be done. We would build nuclear facilities, we would start developing the artificial sun, and there would be an emergency campaign for fusion energy. An emergency campaign for fusion energy. And I got to tell you, folks, it wouldn't take very long, right? I have interviewed Dr. Eric Lerner, who is the director of fusion energy research in the state of New Jersey. And I went to his laboratory, and he has a beautiful facility. And he's made clear that, look, if they really got the funding that they needed, if there was really an international combined effort, then fusion energy would be maybe 1 or 2 years away, tops. No need to apologize, Jared. Fusion energy would be about 1 or 2 years away, but that's not what's happening. China is struggling on their own. Russia is calling for international cooperation, but the big oil companies and the big monopolies are doing their own thing, BP and Chevron and ExxonMobil. This has got to be ended. The free market cannot be trusted to handle fusion energy, right? Can't be. And this is the burning urgency of the moment. The burning urgency of the moment. Fusion City must be erected in the center, in the heartland of the United States. It's got to be far from the oceans, right? You can't have Fukushima, for goodness sakes. Got to be far from the oceans. And it would be a way to economically stimulate the heartland of the United States. We need to build Fusion City. That would be the emergency program to address climate change by the Center for Political Innovation. A government of action would erect Fusion City in the heartland of America and have an emergency crash program to solve fusion energy now in a non-competitive way in a joint international effort. Fusion City now. That needs to be the slogan. Fusion City now. We should be raising this. Every time you hear Greta Thunberg get up there, every time you hear Ocasio-Cortez talk about, we need a Green New Deal with windmills, you shout, Fusion City now. If you really want to solve climate change, Fusion City now. Fusion City now. What Roosevelt did with the Manhattan Project, that emergency project to get the atomic bomb, that it can be done. That was back in the 1940s that they did that. In the middle of World War II, for goodness sakes, they built in the middle of Tennessee, they built a city to figure out the atomic bomb. Well, we are in the middle of a global crisis, and Russia and China and Britain and all the major countries agree with this. Fusion City now. That is the solution to climate change. Anytime you hear one of these Green New Deal hacks, one of these pessimistic degrowth hackers get up there, say, Fusion City now. That is the answer. If you want to solve climate change, the answer is called Fusion City now. And the Center for Political Innovation is developing a formal policy proposal. Fusion City now. Okay. Nationalizing land ownership, agriculture. Right? That is the solution to climate change. Fusion City now, right? A new emergency Manhattan Project, not to create bombs, not to create weapons of mass destruction, but instead to create the energy source that will save us from the crisis called climate change. Fusion City now. We will build Fusion City. We are city builders, and the way to solve the problem of climate change is by city building. We will build Fusion City. That is the socialist solution to the climate crisis. Another super chat. Caribbean pirate ships. Caribbean pirate ships. More than Navy. That's the solution. Now, that is the Center for Political Innovation policy solution to the issue of climate change. Now, the second issue that we need to deal with is immigration, right? Look at what's happening on the border. Texas has declared a crisis. There are people piling into the country. There are so many desperately poor people in Guatemala and Honduras and in El Salvador. How do we resolve this? How do we resolve this? Well, Trump says, I'm going to build a big, giant wall. I'm going to build a big, beautiful wall. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to build a wall. How did that work? Did Trump's big, beautiful wall solve the problem? Absolutely not. Now, what's Joe Biden doing now? Not much. What's Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris is supposed to be in charge of it, and she's barely done anything. She hasn't even had a press conference about it. Well, the Center for Political Innovation puts forward that the solution to the crisis of mass migration, of people piling into the country, of dead bodies piling, along the U.S. border, of killed children being detained and migrants. The solution to this, is the implementation of economic development. Guatemala, Honduras have been ground into poverty by decades of neoliberalism and coups. They suffer from drug gangs. But right now, we have a progressive government in Mexico. We have AMLO, who's a socialist, a leftist. I mean, he's not, it's a capitalist country, but he's a popular president who's made anti-imperialist statements. We have a socialist government in Nicaragua, right, that has been very successful in eradicating poverty. Very, very few, BRICS. Very, very, very few of the immigrants piling on the U.S. border from Nicaragua because of their success, right? So we have a progressive government in Mexico. We have socialism in Nicaragua. DuPont's, Rothschilds, Carnegie's. All right. And China has also been key in economic development. What we need to do is we need a strategy for stabilizing Central America being stabilized with an economic development project. We need to create the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. Right now, you may not know, Sandino is the national leader of Nicaragua, an anti-imperialist fighter. Emil Zapata is the national hero of Mexico. And at this point, a government of action in the United States, seeing the crisis on the border, seeing how many desperately poor people are suffering, seeing the drug gangs, a government of action would team up with China, with Mexico, with Nicaragua to launch the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor and a mass program of economic development from the southwest of the United States down into Mexico, down into Central America, all the way down to Nicaragua, connecting Nicaragua and the United States with a vast economic corridor of development, right? We would build nuclear power plants all through there. We would start infrastructure projects immediately, and there needs to be an emergency mobilization of economic development of Central America, the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. That is the solution to the immigration crisis. There's a big crisis on the border. People are dying. Trump wants to build a big, beautiful wall, and that's not going to work. And Joe Biden wants to, and that's not going to work. Meanwhile, there are many Chicano people, even within the United States and the Old Southwest, who are impoverished and need jobs and need economic development. So the solution is pretty obvious, right? The Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. Build the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. A vast program of international development of Central America, right? Connect Southern California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico with Nicaragua. through a vast program of construction, right? There'd have to be high-speed railway that would be built connecting these regions. There'd have to be new nuclear power plant facilities. There'd have to be hospitals constructed, because a lot of areas in Central America and Mexico don't have access to decent hospitals. And there would be a mass boom of economic construction in the southwestern United States, in Mexico, in Honduras, in Guatemala, all the way down to Nicaragua. That needs to be done. The Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. Right? So that is our solution to the crisis of immigration. So next time you hear some person going, they're rapists, they're going to kill us all, say, well, the solution is the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. Right? The next time someone tells you the immigrants are coming here, they're taking our jobs, they took our jobs, say, and we're going to create a lot more jobs by building up the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor. That is the solution. Anti-immigrant bigotry is not going to save us. It's not going to make us happier. It's not going to make us safer. A big, beautiful wall is not going to help, right? ICE kicking down doors in the middle of the night and terrorizing immigrant communities in the United States, that's not going to help. Having, police pointing guns at people and saying, papers, please, papers, please, that is not going to solve the problem. The problem of mass migration is rooted in the problem of underdevelopment and neoliberalism. Abolish ICE, abolish the anti-immigrant programs. No, we're not going to build a big, beautiful wall. We're going to build something that makes Donald Trump's proposed big, beautiful wall look tiny. We are going to build a mass economic corridor, the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor, connecting Central America to the United States, building nuclear power plants, building high-speed railway, employing millions of people, millions of unemployed Americans going to Mexico to lay the railways and work with millions of unemployed Mexicans. We got, the government of I can guarantee you that the government of AMLO, he would be on board. Lopez Obrador would be on board. China and the China Railway Corporation that makes the fastest trains in the world, they would be on board. The Sandinistas and the government of Daniel Ortega, they would be on board. And all it would take to make it happen would be a government of action in Washington, D.C. If we had a government of action, they would immediately sit down with AMLO, sit down with Ortega, sit down with Xi Jinping and say, let's make it happen. Let's solve the humanitarian crisis on the border. Let's solve it once and for all. And MS-13 would lose their shit. MS-13 would be going out of business. In a minute, MS-13 would go out of business. Why? Because do you think people want to be drug-dealing armed terrorists? No. People would be laying down their guns. Members of MS-13 would be laying down their guns and signing up to start building railroads, building hospitals, building schools, right? It would be MS-13 would be out of business within a month or in 2 months. MS-13 would be desperate for recruits. If there's all these good-paying jobs, all these new opportunities to do constructive work, signing up for terrorist narco drug gangs is not exactly going to be an appealing thing to do. And that would put the drug gangs out of business. That would solve the crisis of mass migration. It would provide mass employment. This is the solution to the crisis on the border, right? So there you go, right? Now, let's make the important point. The point that William Z. Foster makes in his book is that if you had a government that did these things, right? If you had a government that came in and started rebuilding the United States, a government that came in and nationalized the oil and gas and natural resources, if you had a government that came in and put banking under the hands of the state, if you had a government that came in and guaranteed an economic bill of rights, if that government then built Fusion City and started solving the problem of climate change by creating a huge scientific research crash program in Iowa, right? If they then, solved the problem of mass migration, if they did that, they would be faced with mass resistance. The FBI, the CIA, the U.S. military leaders would be trying to have a coup. The CIA and the FBI would be trying to undermine them. And it would be the burning necessity. We would have to create a new army, right? The U.S. Army would have to be dismantled because it would be a threat to it. And we would have to build a new socialist army, right? There would have to be, the U.S. Congress would have to dissolve the U.S. Army and create a socialist army or a socialist military for the United States. The CIA would have to be dissolved, and you'd have to create a new socialist intelligence agency for the United States. The FBI would have to be dissolved, and you'd have to replace it. The FBI was created to fight communists. Anti-communism is in their training. You'd have to create a new federal police force that was very much pro-socialist and pro-working class, right? And so out of a government of action, in order for a government of action to stay intact and to carry out its agenda, a government of action that was doing all the things that I just laid out, that no rational person would oppose, a government of action would, out of necessity, have to move to create the dictatorship of the proletariat, the bodies of armed men that form the bourgeois state. The FBI, the CIA, and the Pentagon would have to be dissolved. A new socialist military, a new socialist intelligence apparatus, and a new socialist police force would have to be created. It wouldn't be an option. It wouldn't be an option. Would not be an option. And the USA would have to move from an elected, popular working class government to a dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the bourgeoisie would have to be broken up, and a dictatorship of the proletariat would have to be created. It wouldn't be an option. It wouldn't be an option. And there would be plenty of people in the U.S. military and in the FBI and in the CIA who would probably come over to our side and probably help the process along. But these old institutions would have to be taken apart, right? You can't build socialism with the U.S. imperialist military. You can't build socialism with J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. You can't build socialism with the CIA, the Central Imperialist Organization. You can't do it. No matter how woke they think they are, you can't do it. Can't do it. And so the United States would be breaking down the capitalist state apparatus and creating a new state apparatus. And with the new state apparatus, with a proletarian state, with a new working class military, with a new working class intelligence agency, with a new working class policing agency, with community assemblies in every city to have the back of working class forces, with a new state apparatus created, with a network of revolutionary councils and progressive associations forming in communities all over the country to carry out the will of the government of action. At that point, full socialism would be very, very realizable. At that point, the resistance of the capitalists would have to be broken, right? And the capitalists would lose their grip on state power, and it would only be a matter of time before we had 5-year economic plans, before we had a centrally planned economy, and production was carried out for social good, not for profits, right? This is the process through which genuine socialist revolutions go through. The mass program of creating a popular government, right? Whether you want to call it a people's government, whether you want to call it a worker and farmer government, a popular front, a united front government, a workers and farmers government, an anti-monopoly state like William Z. Foster talked about. We want to call it a government of action that will fight for working families. But regardless, the creation of an anti-monopoly, anti-imperialist, pro-working class, anti-fascist, anti-war government would, out of necessity, escalate the struggle to the point that it would be necessary to move toward the creation of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then the dictatorship of the proletariat would make very possible the creation of socialism. It's 3 stages. This is 3 stages of transitioning the United States towards socialism. And we advocate that all of these stages be peaceful and legal. We advocate for the legal election of a government of action. We advocate for that government of action to legally dissolve the Pentagon, legally dissolve the FBI, legally dissolve the CIA, legally dissolve the armed bodies of men that serve capitalism. And then we advocate for that new government, perhaps even with a new constitution, to legally and peacefully create socialism. Now, will there be violence along the way? Will there be violence along the way? Not if we have our way, because we advocate a peaceful transition. If there were violence in the process of transitioning to socialism, it wouldn't come from the communists, wouldn't come from the working families, wouldn't come from the labor unions, wouldn't come from the women's organizations or the LGBT organizations or the community organizations, wouldn't come from the policy think tanks of the Center for Political Innovation. No, if there were violence in the process of the United States transitioning towards socialism, that violence would come from the capitalists. It would come from the powers that be, from the FBI, from the CIA, from the Pentagon. It would come from them. And we should not doubt that they would be violent in order to carry out their ends. But that is their decision. Ours is a program of peace. Ours is a program of a popular front government. But just like Abraham Lincoln had the right to defend the American government from the violence of the slaveholders, the government of action would have the right to mobilize the American people to defend the government of action. The legal government of the United States would have the right to defend itself in the face of an onslaught from the capitalists, right? And it would be totally legal for the government of action to suppress any attempted military coup or fascist junta or mobilization. It would be totally within the right of the legally elected government of action. It would be totally within their right to prevent an armed insurrection by the capitalists. If the capitalists would respond to the democratic movement of the people with armed violence, then the state would have the right to suppress their violence and allow the democratic process to move ahead. And this is a program for transitioning the United States towards socialism, a government of action. And I tweeted out some of these proposals earlier, and I got exactly the wrong response. But this tells you a lot. This is very important. When I proposed the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor, someone replied, "Why do you want to save American imperialism?" How would using state power to raise millions of people out of poverty in Central America be quote-unquote saving American imperialism? Think about that. Leftism has gotten dominated by pessimism. Pessimistic voices that say the only solution is burn it down, tear it down. This isn't socialism. Socialists are constantly coming up with serious policy proposals about how to make life better for working people. That is the duty of socialists. Our job is to be able to approach the people in our neighborhood, the people at our school, the people in our workplace, our coworkers, our fellow students, our neighbors, our family members, our friends, and be able to tell them in clear words how a socialist government would improve their lives. That is our job, not how a socialist government would burn everything down, not why America is evil and capitalism is evil and you're an evil Euro settler and you need to be deported from somewhere else. No, our job is to explain and put forward a coherent revolutionary program. A coherent revolutionary program to save the country. Right? This is very, very clearly the duty of socialists. How would other capitalist superpowers like France and Britain react to socialism in America? All right, writing it down. Ours react. Ataturk. Alrighty. All right. Right. Kemal Ataturk. How would we react? Right? I mean, how would we react? Right? It is our job to put forward a clear, progressive agenda. Right? In the Communist Manifesto, it says that Communists support every rebellion against the existing order of things, but in all of them, they bring forth the primary question, which is the property question. Raising a program like this, like I'm putting forward, and thank you, Eduardo, a program like this is raising the property question, right? We're showing, by raising a program like this, if someone says, hey, we got this big problem with climate change, what do? We say Fusion City, and we tell them what we could do. That forces people to ask, why is our government not doing this? And we have the answer, because the government works for the capitalists. But we need to mobilize and build a government of action that will fight for working families. If if people are saying, oh my God, look at the crisis at the border, what are we going to do about this? We need to raise the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. And when we raise that, they'll go, wow, if you did that, then this problem at the border would be solved. Wow, why is the government not doing that? We state because the government works for the big corporations and the banks and for the imperialists. But what we need is a government of action that will fight for working families. Right? When we raise a program, by putting forth a program, that is the most effective communist agitation. Anybody can complain. Anybody can get angry. Anyone can fantasize about revolution and violence in the streets. But putting forward a real program, folks, I can guarantee you that if there was a serious candidate for office, was knocking on doors of working families throughout the United States, knocking on their doors, was a serious candidate, had a chance of winning, and people said, okay, Mr. Candidate, what do you believe in? And he said, I want to rebuild the country's crumbling infrastructure, hire all the unemployed. I want to put natural resources and the wealth of America into the public budget so that we can no longer have a budget deficit and pay for things like schools and hospitals. I want to put banking in the hands of the people so that we don't have a creditor class that leeches off the rest of society. And I want to guarantee an economic bill of rights. And I'm going to solve climate change by building a huge center called Fusion City in the center of America and teaming up with all the great countries around the world to fly in and have an emergency program for fusion energy. And I'm going to solve the border crisis by mobilizing and hiring millions of Americans and millions of Mexicans and millions of Nicaraguans and millions of Chinese people to economically develop Central America so people don't want to leave their homes anymore and we can put MS-13 out of business. If someone came with that program, I can guarantee you a very large percentage of Americans would vote for such a candidate. And that candidate, now, that candidate may not say, well, Mr. Candidate, you may be a communist. I don't agree with communism. And the guy may say, well, that's fine. Some of the people in my coalition are communists, but some of them are social democrats, some of them are anarchists, some of them are deeply conservative religious folks, some of them aren't, but I am running on a platform of my program, and that's what I'm for. I can guarantee you that many Americans, a very, 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 very big percentage of Americans, if given the choice to vote for a serious candidate who put forward that program, many Americans would go ahead and vote for them. In a socialist America, how would the antagonism in the cities and the rural areas be resolved? Antagonism. Sorry. My allergies are killing me today, folks. Between cities and rural areas in socialist America, right? Now, this is how real communist parties operate. What I'm proposing here, right? And it would have to be a coalition. I mean, there'd have to be many, many different forces involved. It wouldn't be one true party, But if a broad coalition could be created around a real economic program with real policy solutions to make American life better by challenging the power of capitalists, we could have socialism. This is how serious communist parties operate, what I'm describing here, right? And With the Center for Political Innovation, I am trying to build a think tank that can put forward these proposals, right? Our website is going to be up very, very soon, right? And this is how a real revolutionary Marxist and Communist Party operates. Now, that's what I wanted to use my opening remarks to talk about, right? I just wanted to talk about this because this is how we should approach the workers. This is how we should approach the working class. So there you go. Those are my opening remarks. So I will call you out as I see you, names and locations. And we'll do our roll call. And then I'll start answering your questions. So there you go. Names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Jared in Virginia. Fred in Alameda County. Las Vegas. Itzel, GHE24 in Mississippi. Chaya in Montreal. Nate in Chicago. Alan in Chicago. Tristan from Maryland. Ryan in Oakland. Nassau County. Char Darling. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Los Angeles. Paragas. Florida. Queens, New York. Puerto Rico, Chris Perez, Io Hillary in NYC, Ishmael Lopez in Los Angeles, Bradley Wasser in St. Louis, Clydebank, San Angelo Solidarity, Lockport, New York, Foster, Kentucky, Natalie in Maryland, Springfield, Missouri, Auckland, New Zealand, Nashville, William in Arkansas, Adelaide, Australia, Toronto, Shulgi in Los Angeles, Jose Huao in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Tony in Tasmania, Javier in NYC, Woodside. I think I'm going to make you a mod, Javier. All right, Elias in Wisconsin, Vinicius in Brazil, Embattled Fate in Texas, Baldwin County, Helen Woolley. Welcome back, Helen. You're always here. You're always welcome. There you go. Bellingham, Washington, Martin, Ireland, South Carolina, Harry in Melbourne, Pomona, California, Union County, New Jersey, Kieran from San Diego, Marta in Poland, Toronto, Mesa, Arizona, Saudi, Ecuadoria, Cincinnati, Jenny Lynn, Ben from Santiago, Arturo from Alaska, San Jose, Sergio, Northern California, Shanghai, Salt Lake City, New York, Massachusetts, Perth, Australia, Lagos, Nigeria. Anybody else? Who else is with us? San Diego. Radical Leftist Agenda in San Diego. Very good. Very, very good. Stevens from Riverside County, California. Boston. Berlin. Asheville, North Carolina. There you go. Yeah, Fort Lauderdale. Very good. Very, very good. Florida, Sean Hazley, very good. Sean Hazley of Florida, Santa Barbara, California, Paul So. All right. Leo in Mexico, very, very good. Excellent. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. I will give a much more professional and slick version of that presentation at some point, but that was just I just wanted to give you, what's been on my mind today about how a real program is necessary. So on that note, folks, all right, we'll start answering the super chat questions. Democracy in a socialist America. Well, socialism is far more democratic than capitalism for this reason. In order for a socialist state to stay in power, you need the involvement of the population. What do you think a Soviet is? It's a Soviet, like the Soviet Union, that was a workers' council, right? And in China, they had peasant associations, workers' associations. In Cuba, they have the local committee to defend the revolution. In China, you have a Communist Party, affiliate in every building. In Nicaragua, they have the what is it called? Citizens' Power Councils. In Venezuela, they have what are called Bolivarian circles, right? Kendall in San Diego is here, Costa Rica. And that socialist governments and anti-imperialist governments in general always depend on a highly involved and mobilized population. Look, the government of Iran would not be in power for a minute without these things called Basij councils. They're called Basij councils, or the mobilized oppressed. And they are in every neighborhood, every city, and it's people that support the Islamic Revolution that are mobilized to carry out its goals, right? And, I mean, in Syria, the Ba'ath government of Syria has similar things. In Venezuela, they have the Bolivarian circles. Anti-imperialist governments depend on a well-mobilized population. Meanwhile, capitalist governments do the opposite. They don't want people involved at all. They want people to just, sit back and, let the smart people handle everything, right? And they get scared when we get involved. They call it fascism when we get involved, right? If the people are being mobilized, oh my God, and they're demanding their rights, that's populism. Oh my God, we can't have that. But no, socialist governments, regardless of other issues, regardless of, issues like freedom of speech and such, because socialist governments depend on a well-organized population, because of that, all right, Trotskyite Antifa, Trotskyite elements in Antifa. Because of that, they're more democratic. So a socialist America, in order to truly be socialist, would have a government that depended on the mobilized population. So it would be more democratic. All right, emotional blackmail and guilt tripping. And someone talked about that in left-wing circles. I don't know. That only works for so long. Look, there was a communist group I was involved with very briefly in Cleveland. And, I'd be in college, and I'd have a class. I'd have to go to class. And they would call me up on the phone, and they'd be like, we're going to go sell the newspaper. And I'd be like, well, I got class. Can we maybe do this tomorrow? Or I'll be done after class. They'd say, oh, why don't you explain to all the Iraqi children who got blown up today that your class was more important than doing what could stop it? People generally don't take that for very long. People generally go, yeah, I'm not, the kind of the pressuring people, the use of guilt, it doesn't work, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, you can talk about how it's not right, et cetera, but it just doesn't work. At the end of the day, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Eventually people say, screw you, right? And that you can't guilt trip a revolution, right? And that's a really important thing, right? It needs to be clear that it is in the broad masses of people's economic interest. You're not going to shame the broad masses of people into supporting socialism. It's not going to happen, right? The broad masses of people are not just going to become so ashamed of themselves and so guilty that they make the United States socialist. That's not how things work, right? You can't guilt trip the revolution. You can't shame the revolution. At the end of the day, socialism becomes popular because people come to understand that it is in their economic interest, right? And that's what the synthetic left and the middle class left does not understand. You will not guilt trip the masses into having a revolution. You will not emotionally blackmail the masses into having a revolution. You have to show the masses that socialism and the agenda is in their economic interest by putting forward a clear, coherent program, right? And, there you go. All right. I remember, some of these communist groups, they will say things. One of these communist groups was raising the slogan at one point. They were shouting at random people on the street that were going by them, stop thinking like an American and start thinking about humanity. That's kind of a neat slogan. It sounds neat, but it's not going to work, right? I'm sorry, most people, they hear you say, stop thinking like an American, start thinking about humanity, are going to look at you like, okay, and yeah, they're not going to, they don't care, right? Like that approach, that's not, we are the champions of you. That's shaming the masses. And that's a big element of the petty bourgeois left, right? They view the masses as the enemy, largely. The masses are not woke enough, and they're all privileged, and and all that, and so yeah, people don't want to hear them. Our message to the masses needs to be that our program is in their economic interest. All right, the Haitian Revolution and its impact on Louisiana Purchase. That's a good one. I have no idea. I really don't know. I do know that Louisiana is the only state in the country that instead of having counties has parishes, because it was originally a French territory, and the laws of Louisiana are based on the Napoleonic Code, and they're rooted in French law under Napoleon, and that culturally Louisiana is a little bit different than the rest of the country because it was a French territory that was originally purchased, right, in Louisiana Purchase. I know the Haitian Revolution, the slave revolution that happened, in Haiti, that Alexander Hamilton supported, Thomas Paine supported, but, Thomas Jefferson and others did not support. And, I know about the Haitian Revolution, which was the first slave revolution, which was a big deal, but Toussaint Louverture and such. But I don't know about how the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Revolution are connected. I don't know the specifics about that. So if you do know about it, perhaps you should make a video or share that, because, folks, I don't know everything. There are many things that I do not know, and this person asked about one of those things. I do not know about that. The next question I do know about. What is the IWW? Well, the IWW is the Industrial Workers of the World, and it was a labor union that was formed in the United States, and it was formed at a time that the reason it was called the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, was because at the time the American Federation of Labor, AFL, was the main labor union, and it only permitted skilled workers, right? It said that if you are unskilled, if you don't have to have an apprenticeship in order to do your job, you are not welcome. But industrial workers, people who worked the assembly line, who were considered unskilled, were welcome in the IWW. And the slogan of the IWW was one big union. They wanted to create one big union for the workers of the world. They were syndicalists. Right? Meaning that they wanted the workers to seize their factories. And they opposed politics. And it's... Whoa, my allergies. Sorry about that, folks. Allergies, man. Wow, they opposed politics, favoring only direct action on the job. They did not vote. They did not campaign to change laws or change legislation. Their policy was simply direct action on the job. And they did not sign union contracts because they said that signing contracts, recognized your employer's right to exploit you. And so what they did was they would have the IWW, and they would organize strikes where the workers would refuse to work until the bosses gave them better conditions. Or they would organize sometimes what they called strike on the job. Strike on the job, which was a campaign of sabotage, basically. They would organize the workers on the job to sabotage the machinery and to covertly break things. They talk about the old wooden shoe, right? Ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay, ta-ra-ra-boom-de-ay. Right? It was the old wooden shoe, right? You talk about how the term sabotage, supposedly, I don't know if this is actually true. There's some people who debate this. Supposedly back in Holland or Norway, where a lot of Wobblies came from, a lot of them were immigrants. Apparently, people wore wooden shoes that were called sabots. Sabot was the term for wooden shoes. And, when workers were angry, they would stick their wooden shoes into the machine, and the machines would break. And so that was where sabotage, right, came from. You were sticking the wooden shoe. And, they used to joke about the old wooden shoe, right? And the Wobblies were known for, they would wreck the machinery. And that was, they would do, in cases where they couldn't mobilize a full-on strike, there would be what they called a strike on the job, where the equipment at the factory was just constantly getting broken until the employer gave in. And the Wobblies, they were probably, back in, before World War I, they were the main revolutionary organization. You had the Socialist Party, which was an electoral organization that included some very radical and some very moderate forces, the broad spectrum led by Eugene Debs. And then you had the IWW, the Wobblies, that were organizing, direct action on the job, fighting for the workers. And, the Wobblies, they organized a big strike in New Jersey, in Passaic, New Jersey. They organized a huge strike, of the textile workers demanding their rights. The Wobblies were also famous for their free speech fights, right? Because they would go, especially out west, in Washington and in California and in Oregon, they would go and, they would have a speaker. A soapbox speaker would get up and start giving a speech and be arrested. All these little towns had a law that you could not preach socialism or preach, working class agitation you couldn't do it, right? And so they'd get arrested. So in order to demand the right of free speech, the Wobblies would mobilize all their members in what were called free speech fights, where thousands and thousands of Wobblies would come to one little tiny town and one by one get arrested. And pretty soon the town's jails would be full of people, and the town's jails and courts would be so overworked. Plus there'd be a lot of property damage usually in the town. A lot of windows would get broken. A lot of local businesses would have some property damage, and based on that, the town would give in and allow free speech, right? That was what the Wobblies were known for, their free speech fights. Big Bill Haywood organized the miners, right, of Colorado, the coal miners of Colorado, into the Wobblies. And there were armed battles, between coal miners and miners in the mountains of Colorado, the Rocky Mountain miners fighting for their rights, led by the Wobblies, and the U.S. military. The U.S. military was sent in, and they would bomb these people. They would use airplanes. There would be airplanes that would drop bombs on the encampments of the Wobblies, and they would shoot down the airplanes, right? I mean, these guys were radicals. They were militants, right? I mean, that was the IWW. And they were big, one big union. And, Joe Hill was a folk singer who was associated with the Wobblies, who traveled around the country and would sing. So he would take all the popular songs at the time and he would rewrite them to be about the working class struggle, right? So you had that. And it was, the Wobblies were a militant working class organization at a time when you had a lot of immigrants coming to the United States from Finland and from Norway and from Sweden, as well as from Italy, as well as from Ireland, as well as from Eastern Europe. You had this mobilization called the IWW, the Wobblies. Now, the Wobblies were pretty much outlawed during World War I. A number of the leaders were thrown in prison because they were against the war, and they were anti-war. And a number of Wobblies were lynched. There were lynch mobs that executed Wobblies, that killed Wobblies, and they were against the war, and they were pretty much broken up during World War I. And they didn't believe in signing union contracts, and they were really, really opposed to the American Federation of Labor, so much so that they would scab on strikes by the AFL, right? Because the American Federation of Labor was not revolutionary, they considered it not to be a real union. And so there was kind of a blood feud between them and the American Federation of Labor. Prevent stagnation, all right? In socialist USA. All right. So they had their problems, but many of the best communist leaders in the United States had been Wobblies at one point. William Z. Foster had been a Wobbly for a long time. Many of the top communists in the country had been leaders of the Wobbly Union at one point. So, that's the IWW. They're still around technically, but they're not what they were. I think if I'm not mistaken, I believe in Union Square in New York City, there's a Starbucks coffee that the Wobblies have a union contract, actually, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the status of it, but years ago, there was a Starbucks coffee in Union Square that had a union contract with the Wobblies. I mean, the IWW still exists, but it's mainly, they're liberals now. I mean, more than anything, they're liberal anarchists, right? A lot of anarchists join the IWW. You can join on their website. But they're anarcho-liberals now. And it's just anyone can join, right? You could just fill out a card. I mean, anyone can be a member of it. And, a lot of them are involved with NGOs, liberal kind of NGOs. And a lot of, your typical, pink, purple hair, nose-piercing anarchist thinks they're a Wobbly, and that's, it's whatever. I mean, they're not... I wouldn't call them a real, at this point, they're not a real force. I mean, I don't know of very many union places that, whatever. I mean, they're a remnant of the past, okay? They stopped really being relevant at about the time of World War I. But, there's a lot of books written about them. And I've noticed this, right? Because there's no state that the Wobblies were tied to, right? The Wobblies, when they were big, there was no Soviet Union, there was no China, there was no Cuba, there was no Vietnam, and same with Eugene Debs, right? Same with Eugene Debs, right? Socialism in Libya, post-Gaddafi. Same with Eugene Debs. Eugene V. Debs, he was a great socialist and revolutionary, but he was not tied to any government, any state, any actually existing socialism. It was just ideology. It was just theory. Because of that, they're safe for academia, right? If you want to get your PhD in American history and write a biography of some famous wobbly, you can do it. If you want to, get your PhD in labor studies and write a bio of Eugene Debs, you can do it. And the Communist Party, because they were, tankies and pro-Soviet and Marxist-Leninist and all that, they're tainted. But, the Wobblies, the Socialist Party, because they're basically, because they were not, during their heyday, they weren't tied to any existing state. They're safe, right? And a lot of more liberal, Trotskyite, anarchist types will support them, and you'll get books about them that are published, and that they get kind of celebrated. They get celebrated in a way because they're not, yeah. So there you go. But there you go. All right, cool. I was asked my position on prostitution, sex work, and I have said my position many times, which is twofold. So, first of all, it's important to recognize that there are some people who do that voluntarily, and there are many, 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 many people who don't. For the majority of people in the world, human trafficking, the sex trade, is a horrendous, abominable thing. However, there are now, especially with the internet and all of that, there are many young women, and I guess men, I suppose, who do it on a different basis. They do it voluntarily. And that is different, okay? But if the working class movement and a communist go around acting like they are in favor of quote-unquote sex work, that can be very off-putting to working class people who know the reality of pimps and prostitution and human trafficking and are going to not appreciate that. And it's quite an arrogant, there's often a lot of insensitivity from the sex worker activist community to that reality. They often, they assume that people who do that voluntarily, because that's what they want to do, right? They assume that their experience, they kind of gloss over the facts that the majority of the people in the world who do that are not like them. So I would argue that they need to be more sensitive to that fact. But overwhelmingly, I do agree with the sentiments of the sex worker community that it shouldn't be outlawed. It should be legal. If people want to do that, they should be allowed to do that. They shouldn't be shamed on the basis of doing that. People shouldn't be, what they call quote-unquote slut shaming shouldn't go on. There's no reason that women who do that or have been forced to do that or, should go to prison or be punished for it in any way. There's no reason that women like that should be shamed or mistreated, right? And the idea that, a woman who does that is a dirty, evil person who should be abused, that's awful. That's horrible. That's not the right attitude. You don't demonize people like that. You don't do that. You don't demonize people like that. So it's a twofold position. On the one hand, I feel like some of the sex worker activism kind of ignores the reality of what sex work is for many people who do it. On the other hand, though, they're right. I mean, it should be legal, right? Legalize it, right? Legalize it. Stop the stigmatization of the people who do it. No discrimination against people who do that. They should have the freedom to do that. But there should not be any compulsion to do that, and that includes economic compulsion. People should have the right to jobs and housing and education. No one should feel like they have to do that kind of stuff, right? If somebody wants to do that, they just simply want to do that as a way to make money, that's their business, and that's that. However, if people are economically compelled, right? If there's a mom with kids who's desperate and that's the only way she can pay her bills, that's awful. That should not happen. And socialism is about eliminating that. In a socialist society, there could be somebody who has the opportunity for a guaranteed job with the state, has been provided with education, and they say, you know what, this is what I want to do, then that's their right. Then I would not stop them from doing that. and I respect that there are different positions on this. I totally do. I do respect that there are different positions on this, right? And I hear you, Natalie, and I hear other people, and I have friends with very different views on this, right? I have friends who are vehemently on one side of it, and I have friends who are vehemently on the other side. And my position is somewhat nuanced, which is overwhelmingly left is too harsh on libertarians. Which is that while it shouldn't be criminalized and all of that, we need to recognize what it is. Left is too harsh on libertarians. Yes, and yeah, these websites, right? Well, anyway, okay. I think I said what I needed to say. So there you go, right? And that's my position, that it should be legal. It should be legal. People should be allowed to do that, but that it should be, we should keep in mind that for most people in the world to engage in it, it's something very, 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 very different. Human trafficking, the sex trade, et cetera, is very, very different, number one. And that economic compulsion needs to be eliminated. There should not be any economic compulsion to do that kind of work, right? And that needs to be gotten rid of, the economic compulsion that drives people to do that. Look, I mean, there's been a huge boom in that stuff since the pandemic. And why? Why has there been a huge boom since the pandemic? Because there aren't opportunities. People, women are stuck at home. And if you can't go to work, it's a way they can still pay their bills. Well, that's not right. Women should be able to women and men should be able to economically survive without facing an economic compulsion to do something like that. Look, if you're compelled, right? If you're compelled to do something you don't want to do, is that really consent? Right? And I don't want to get into this too much because this is a downward spiral. And I'm sure there's a bunch of people that are mad at me on both sides of this that are really mad about everything I've said here. But I'm just giving my perspective, right? I'm just giving my perspective. I respect the views of others, but that's my view. All right. All righty. Okay. All right. Should the 50 states be merged into one big state? No, I think that, you need different levels of government, right? I mean, other countries have provinces, regions, etc. So, maybe the way the states are, I don't like the Electoral College and the way some states are inflated. I don't like that. I don't like the way our Senate is. I think our Senate, the way every state gets 2 senators, Vermont and California both have 2 senators. That's ridiculous. But, other than that, there you go. All right. David Fox points out that China is reversing desertification, and that's very true. China is doing great stuff. All these environmentalists should love China, but they don't. They always find a way to bash China. China's doing so much. So I wrote down libertarian. I must have. Does anyone remember what that super chat was? It was the one that came after China reversing desertification. It says libertarian. What was it? If anyone remembers what that super chat was, we'll get back to it. It says libertarian. I must not have written everything down. All right. Nationalizing land ownership and agriculture. Are libertarians bad was the up chat? Is that what it was? I just wrote down libertarians. Oh, libertarian to fascist pipeline. Okay, thank you, Chaya. Much appreciated. Libertarian to fascist pipeline. All right. Well, look, I have long maintained that there are certain fascistic themes in a lot of libertarian rhetoric, right? The United States used to be good, and then the evil left-wing communist conspiracy took it over. So we want to restore the greatness of the past. And that's reactionary, right? They think the Gilded Age was good. They think the USA got to be socialist or became left-wing. So there are certain fascist tropes, and not anymore really, but for a while, during the Ron Paul years, there were a lot of straight up Nazi, Ku Klux Klan kind of people who were in the libertarian movement trying to recruit. Now, Now, actually, things have changed. Libertarians have gotten a lot weaker. A lot of Alex Jones, people like that, that are hard right wingers, have moved out of libertarianism and moved into the Trump camp, moved into the alt-right circles. So libertarianism now is a little bit tamer than it once was. But it used to be, yes, that the libertarian movement was crawling. Okay, Zizek Tanky, was crawling with far right elements. I mean, Ron Paul is a great example. Right, Ron Paul with his Confederate flags, and read his newsletter in the '90s, and Ron Paul is very much a right wing guy, a John Birch Society kind of guy, but he was very much from the far right, but suddenly he was a libertarian. That was Ron Paul, but yeah, now libertarianism is a little bit different now. I mean, now, a lot of the like nationalist elements in libertarianism, a lot of the like weirder conspiracy theory elements in libertarianism have moved into other camps. But look, I mean, Stefan Molyneux, right? I mean, that guy calls himself a libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, but there's a lot of white supremacism in what he preaches, right? White people are always the victims, right? I mean, you listen to my debate with him, he's constantly accusing me of being anti-white, and, there's this vast conspiracy against white people. European civilization has been given a bad rap. This isn't just standard libertarianism. This is like right-wing ideological stuff. There's, Stefan Molyneux, you listen to his content, he's more, there's white supremacist stuff underneath the surface of the libertarianism. And that's true. I mean, there's other examples. I mean, I debated Augustus Sol Invictus, and that guy, calls himself a libertarian, but I mean, he also calls himself a white supremacist. I mean, he ran for office as a libertarian, but he was a white supremacist. I'm sorry that my allergies are just killing me here, folks, but I'm going to get through this. So, right. Also, many people have talked about how, I mean, there's economic inequality throughout the United States. People of color have a lower income on average than white people do. And well, if there's no such thing as, if capitalism is the answer to everything, right, then it can't be that there's systemic racism, and it can't be that we need affirmative action, or, if you have to stick with conservative right-wing ideology, well, then that's where, the libertarians will start saying, well, that's just because some people are naturally more intelligent than others. And so there is, if you insist that there can't be anything wrong with capitalism, right? If there can't be anything wrong with capitalism, right? If that's what you insist, there can't be anything possibly wrong with capitalism. And so you just start trying to explain, racial inequality. You start trying to explain, gender inequality in terms of some people are just better than others. There you go. All right. All righty. The next question: nationalizing land and ownership of agriculture. Look, agribusiness should be nationalized. The big, huge agribusiness corporations, yes, but we should protect the small farmers, right? I mean, there are some small family farmers still around, and we should support them. But yeah, the big conglomerates, big agribusiness, nationalize it, right? Absolutely. That whole model that the Soviet Union had of the collective farms and stuff, we don't have to do that here. Look, our agriculture is not at that state, right? At this point, most farming in the United States is in the hands of giant agribusiness, right? The stuff that isn't, is independently owned. I don't see any reason to mess with the small number of small farmers in the United States. And I also don't see a reason that we should break apart, what's already centralized by agribusiness. I think we should just nationalize agribusiness. All right. Were Caribbean pirate ships more democratic than the Navy? Well, sure, right? I mean, the pirates, they tended to elect their crew. I think there's some anarchists who like to romanticize the pirates, of the 1800s because, oh, look, it was egalitarian and democratic. Oh, look, they're attacking the imperialist ships. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. And again, that's not a solution, right? I mean, the pirates weren't revolutionaries. They were criminals. They were just criminals. But you see that's the anarchist mindset, right? We're not going to actually try to get beyond capitalism. We're going to be part of this lumpen element that like fights the system and grifts off the system man or something like that, right? That's I've seen anarchist books that glorify pirates as the ideal. Like we want to be modern pirates. Well, no, we don't want to be modern pirates. We want to be revolutionaries, right? We want a government of action that will fight for working families. But certain anarchist elements don't see it that way, right? And that's the pirates were lumpen, right? But yes, the pirate ships were tended to be democratic, right? The British Navy, the American Navy, they didn't elect the captain, and you obeyed the captain. You had the flogging, cat of nine tails, and all of that, right? And there was mutinies. Often there were mutinies on the ship because the conditions were bad, and I think there was a Navy captain, John Paul Jones, in the American Revolution, who killed his sailors, right? I mean, he killed multiple sailors by flogging them to death, right? I mean, he was a vicious authoritarian. I mean, were the pirate ships more democratic than the imperialist navies? Yes. Does that mean that they're the answer? No. And that we don't want to fall into that mindset of, well, we're not actually gonna overthrow the system. So we're not actually gonna overthrow the system. So we just want to build these kind of somewhat egalitarian entities that go around robbing from it or something. No, that's not the ideal. That's again, that's like Gen X anarchist kind of logic, right? So there you go. BRICS. That's the idea of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa building their own currency. That would be progressive. BRICS would be a progressive thing, absolutely. All right. I was asked about three families: the DuPonts, the Rothschilds, and the Carnegies. Well, we'll go in backwards order. Andrew Carnegie was the great steel capitalist, right? He was a capitalist in the steel industry in the United States. Exploited his workers viciously, but, he was a captain of industry, built a lot of infrastructure, libraries, stuff like that. And the Carnegies are one of the richest families. Worker co-op weapons manufacturer. I'll write that down. Very good. All right. That was one of the richest families is the Carnegies, right? That's one of the six families that they talk about. This America's 60 families, right? Or the six families that dominate U.S. politics. You can read Ferdinand Lundberg wrote about that. So there's that. That's the Carnegies, the steel giants, Industrial Revolution. You can talk about the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds are a banking family in Britain, right? And there's a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories centered around them. But they're just a wealthy banking family in Britain that happened to be Jewish. And they're Zionists. They were big supporters of Zionism, right? Because they were anti-communist. They were wealthy. And, many Jews were communists or socialists, but the Rothschilds, being wealthy capitalists, they were supporters of Zionism. Zionism was seen as the alternative to Bolshevism and Marxism. And, I don't know much what more to say about it. The Rothschilds, they loaned money to the British government to build the Suez Canal. I believe that was their first major situation where they actually were loaning money to the British government to build the Suez Canal. And was Soup for My Family just a Campbell's marketing campaign? And anarchists got played to shill for a corporation. I've never heard of that. I have no idea what you're talking about there, Red Illuminati. I have no idea what you're talking about there. I've never heard of that. The DuPonts. The DuPonts, that's a wealthy family, right? I think they're in oil, if I'm not mistaken. Aren't the DuPonts in oil, right? I know the Mellons come out of Pittsburgh, right? There's the Mellons, so there's the Mellons and the Carnegies and there's the Rockefellers and, man, sorry about that. I'm just, again, if you want to check out it's important to look into the history of wealth in the United States. I would check out the work of Ferdinand Lundberg. He wrote America's 60 Families. He wrote Rockefeller Syndrome. This stuff is important. So there you go. All right. How would other capitalist powers react to socialism in the United States? Well, I can imagine they wouldn't be fond of it. They wouldn't be fond of it, right? And I can imagine that they would react, and that if the first world started having socialist revolutions, that there would be, I think that the rest of the first world would get involved. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. What do I think of Kemal Ataturk? Well, again, he's one of these historical figures. See, we play this game in the United States, okay? If somebody gets up and they say, you know what, I like Stalin, everyone goes, oh, Stalin is an evil mass murderer. Oh my God. And it's like, Stalin led Russia during World War II. Stalin, there were prison camps in the USSR and there were executions, and so is Stalin associated with a lot of violence? Yes. I mean, is Stalin associated with a lot of ugly wars and killing? Yes. But then if somebody gets up and says, you know what, I like Napoleon, everyone goes, oh, he's an important leader of French civilization. Well, do you think Napoleon killed a lot of people? Yes. Was Napoleon involved in pretty ugly wars? Yes. I mean, Napoleon was trying to build an empire, declaimed himself the emperor. I mean, it's okay to like Napoleon. It's okay to like Winston Churchill. It's okay to like, it's okay to like various figures from history. But if you like communists, immediately, communists get this stigma of like they're the equivalent of Hitler, right? And that's not correct. I mean, no, I mean, Napoleon, look, you can look at Napoleon as a historical figure, which I do, and say, there are things about Napoleon that I like. There are obviously things about him I don't. But overall, what role did he play? Well, he overturned feudalism in a lot of Europe. Okay. He attacked Russia. That wasn't good. And he, he rolled back some of the more progressive aspects of the French Revolution. He brought back the Catholic. He's a mixed figure, right? He's a mixed historical figure. Was he progressive? Sure. But overall, was he, he's just a mixed historical figure. Right? You can look at George Washington. What about George Washington? Well, owned slaves. That wasn't good. Killed Native Americans. That wasn't good. Helped establish the United States as independent from Britain. That was decent. Gave up power after 8 years to set a tone for not having kings. Okay. It's like we can talk about different historical figures. So Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, the national hero of Turkey. Plenty we can admire about him, Kemal Ataturk, right? He created modern Turkey, great military leader, great strategist, but did he kill a lot of innocent people? Yep. Was he an anti-communist? Yep. Was he aligned with the USSR? Yeah, because for weird reasons, but, he's a mixed figure. He was the founder of modern Turkey, right? He created the modern Turkish state, great military leader. Okay, who is Kemal Ataturk? Kemal Ataturk is an important historical figure. Founding modern Turkey? Good. Suppressing minorities in Turkey and crimes against minority groups in Turkey? Not good, right? Suppressing communists? Not good, right? Racism? Not good. It's like, again, he's like Napoleon, he's like Winston Churchill, he's like George Washington, he's like, there's, and again, he's like, again, you only get this stigma with communists, right? With communists, it's like, we can't be like, Stalin, great leader of Russia, industrialized Russia, defeated the Nazis, but, was the Moscow trials justified? Did all those people who ended up in gulags belong in them? Yeah, Stalin, mixed historical figure, but he, but overall, we can just look at him as historical. Well, we can't do that. We can't do that with Stalin. And, but with Winston Churchill, you can do that. And in fact, most that's written about Winston Churchill is written about him in glowing terms. Winston Churchill is seen as this great hero of the Second World War. He was a racist. He was a mass murderer. He joked about famines. He was vicious. He was awful. In Iraq, the Arabs were rising up against the British after World War I. I bet you didn't know this. But in Iraq, the Arab people of Iraq were rising up against the British, and they used poison gas on the Iraqis. And after they used poison gas on the Iraqis, he was confronted. Winston Churchill, a member of Parliament, was asked, didn't we just decide at the end of World War I that we shouldn't be using poison gas in war? And what was Winston Churchill's response? He said, the Geneva Convention forbids the use of poison gas against men, not against uncivilized tribes. Basically, it was okay to use poison gas against Arabs because he considered them to not be people. He was a pretty vile racist. He was a pretty awful person. But again, Winston Churchill, Oh, well, he won World War II. What? I mean, it's like you're allowed to like Winston Churchill. You're not allowed to like Stalin. You're allowed to like George Washington. You're not allowed to like Mao. We need to get over this stuff. Get over this stuff, okay? And I'm tired of leaders of the capitalist West, being completely. It's somehow okay to like them. But leaders of socialist countries, oh no, if you like them, you're liking their. Get over this. This is not rational history, right? If you can like Napoleon, you can like Winston Churchill, you can like George Washington, and you can like Stalin, right? Now, people should admit all the bad things about Winston Churchill. People should admit all the bad things about Napoleon. People should admit all the bad things about George Washington. And we should admit bad things about Stalin, too. I mean, I know there's a lot of debate and that there's not consensus among historians about every detail of everything. But look, I mean, there are a lot of people who were in gulags who shouldn't have been there. Now, defenders of Stalin will say that was not Stalin's fault. That was Yezhov's fault. Yezhov, right? And that Stalin actually stepped in and stopped that. Okay. I'm sorry I missed. Roll call was up from Detroit, Caleb, says Anthony. What's up back to you, Anthony? Okay. But, I mean, was the Great Terror a good time to be alive? No. Was that good when everyone was turning everyone else in and there was this panic all throughout the USSR and people were turning in their neighbors and stuff? Was that good? No, that wasn't good. That was pretty awful. World War II was pretty awful, right? I mean, it was necessary, to form a very, 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 very authoritarian society to defeat the Nazi invaders. That was absolutely necessary. But do you think it was pleasant? Do you think they were playing nice in World War II? Do you think that the Soviet government just said, all right, everybody, just do your own thing. Nazis are invading, trying to kill us all. So everyone just do whatever you feel like doing. Do you think that that's what they did? No, 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 no. You don't want to have lived in Russia during World War II. I mean, that was, those were harsh times where very, 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 very authoritarian methods were used to defeat the Nazi invaders. They were right to defeat the Nazi invaders, but, they had to use some very extreme methods. So, again, we need to be able to see history with a clear head and not make this judgment that gets poured on communists when we look at history. Everything communists have ever done is bad. Everything the capitalists have done, well, I don't like that. And Ataturk, look, okay. He's a mixed figure, founder of modern Turkey. Okay, that's about it. I mean, obviously a dynamic military leader. I mean, obviously a dynamic statesman. That's about it. You know what I mean? He did bad things, he did good things. Mixed figure. All right. Antagonism between cities and rural areas in socialist America. Well, that's interesting because, the thing is, I actually really like Ramiro when he was in Nicaragua. He talked about how in Nicaragua they have the slogan, grow where you are planted. And they're actively trying to break down the gap between the rural areas and the cities. They're trying to break it down. And by doing that, they're bringing economic development to the countryside in order to break that down. And they're trying to discourage younger folks from leaving the rural areas. They're encouraging them to stay in the rural areas, but bring economic development to the rural areas, right? And that's really great. And I mean, we need accessible Wi-Fi all throughout the country, right? We need to bring the electronic access to rural areas. Absolutely, that's going to be very important. We need to expand education. I went to a rural school in Ohio, and my education sucked. Okay, I don't know how to put it in any other ways. I got a really, really, really bad education, okay? I went to a really, really bad school, all right? And if anyone from the school, the high school, elementary schools I went to is watching, if you're offended by that, I don't care. I went to an awful elementary school, awful junior high, awful high school. And I live in New York City now. New York City is not particularly famous for its good schools, but the kids here, they know way more than the people I went to school with. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous, right? I mean, the quality of the education I got was awful because I was in a rural area, right? And rural areas tend to have very poor schools, right? And my education, the shitty education I got in rural Ohio, in Orrville, Ohio, Smucker's Jellytown, was very, very good compared to what a lot of kids in Mississippi get or in Alabama get. You go to rural Alabama, you go to rural Mississippi, you go to rural West Virginia, those kids get really bad education. Really, really bad education. Okay? You think education's bad, bad in the area that I was in. I think it's particularly bad, and I compare it to people who grew up in New England or people who grew up in California, and I realize the schools I went to were very bad. My education was head and shoulders above people. I mean, look, I mean, there are schools in Kentucky and West Virginia and some of these areas where the teachers have to pay for toilet paper. Did you know this? Right? Did you know this? This happens. There are schools in West Virginia and in Kentucky where the school does not have a budget for toilet paper. And so the teachers, out of their own pocket, have to pay for the toilet paper. Right? And I'm aware of this because I knew people who had worked in such schools, volunteered in such schools. Right? That is abominable. Right? That is abominable. We're always hearing that Venezuela is bad because they don't have toilet paper. Well, I'm sorry, there are schools in rural areas of the United States where the teachers have to go buy toilet paper because they don't have toilet paper. They don't have it in the budget for toilet paper. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong, right? You read, The Shame of a Nation, right, and by Jonathan Kozol, right? And he goes into great detail. I mean, the education gap in the United States is a crime. It is a crime. Right? And, some of these schools in Louisiana, in rural Louisiana and rural Alabama and rural, these schools are really, really low quality education that these kids get. And it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And look, I mean, it's the embarrassment of the country, right? But we have brain drain, right? We don't need to train engineers and scientists and all that. We'll just steal them from Russia or from India or from China or from Vietnam, right? We'll just brain drain them all. Right? That's bad for the developing world. They're stripped of the smart people. It's bad for us because we have shitty education. But there you go. The imperialists have this racket they developed during the Cold War of sucking all the intellectuals and all the smart people out of anti-imperialist and socialist countries, just sucking them out of there, and making the U.S. population, less and less well educated, and meanwhile draining with brain drain all the smart people out of the developing world. And it's this racket the imperialists have developed. And it's bad for the United States and it's bad for the world. It's bad. I mean, and they don't just do it to socialist countries. Nigeria, there's a lot of, go to the doctor, right? Go to the doctor, and go to the Midwest, in the Midwest, you in Cleveland and Pittsburgh or whatever, go to the Cleveland Clinic or go, see how many doctors do you find from India? How many doctors do you find from Russia? How many doctors do you find from China, from Vietnam? Why is that? Why is that? No, that's a result of the fact that, we brain drain. There's not enough Americans going to medical school. We don't train enough of our own doctors. Our education is very bad, but that's okay because we can just, steal them away from countries around the world that are trying to raise themselves up out of poverty and doing it. And in a lot of cases, those countries will educate those people out of the public budget, right? The worst thing you'll see, and this is very common, right? Cuban doctors, right? There's a woman in New York City, I believe, who is a very prominent anti-Cuban activist in New York City. She's a doctor. Born in Cuba, educated in Cuba, got a medical degree in Cuba. And then she ran away to New York City, and now she speaks against communism all the time. Who gave her the opportunity to be a doctor? Yeah, do you think that her family under Batista would have had the opportunity? Who built the best medical school in the world, right? So Fidel, for free, gives her education at the best medical school in the world. She takes that education, and then she defects to the United States. And then, of course, she's making more money here in the United States than she would make in Cuba. But it's like, that's not right. I'm sorry. The Cuban government, with all of its resources and all of that, works very, very hard to educate its population. And then people take that education and run away to the imperialist centers. And it's bad for us because we're not training our population to be doctors. And it's bad for Cuba because they're, Cuba's got plenty of doctors. They have kind of an overflow of doctors. That's a little bit of a different situation. But, it's bad. It's very, very bad. I don't know how we got onto that. All right. Trotskyite elements to Antifa. Well, look, I obviously don't know who makes up Antifa. I'm not part of Antifa. But if you read Trotsky's writings, Trotsky, in the 1930s, he wrote a lot about building a workers' militia. That was a big part of Trotskyism. Build a workers' militia. There's a lot of pamphlets about that. And, in New York City, 1939, the German-American Bund had a rally in Madison Square Garden, and some Trotskyites went in and beat up the speaker and like attacked the speaker. There's video of the Trots running in and having a fist fight with the speaker. In Britain, there was the Battle of Cable Street. It wasn't Trotskyites. That was the Communist Party of Britain, mobilized thousands of people to fight Oswald Mosley in 1936. Very famous incident where Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists, was going to have a march through a Jewish neighborhood. And the Communist Party of Britain mobilized thousands and thousands of people, and they had a rally. You shall not pass, you shall not pass, and it was the Battle of Cable Street. There, and again, this was at a time where there was actually like a fascist movement on the brink of taking power, and, it was a very different situation. So I suspect a lot of people that are involved with Antifa, not a lot actually, but some are probably reading this stuff from the 1930s and like kind of fantasizing that what they're doing today is the same thing. And they're wrong. Right? In the 1930s, you had Hitler in power. You had an actual fascist movement, big divisions in the ruling class, fascist groups in the streets murdering communists left and right and attacking their meetings. And, that was a little bit of a different situation, okay? Nowadays, the fascists are generally just talking. And they're not even really fascists. They're bigoted right-wingers. They're alt-right. They're white supremacists and stuff. But they're not. It's a very different situation. And what Antifa does actually helps them. It actually helps them largely at this point. It gets the fascist publicity, and it escalates to an armed conflict at a time when the left would lose such an armed conflict. And that's what I talk about in the BreadTube book, that it is not strategic now. If you want to talk about how it helps the right wing, gives them publicity, makes them feel like victims. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you were to escalate to an armed conflict right now, because we're not having a civil war in the United States, but if Antifa seems desperate to escalate to an armed conflict, one of two things would happen. Either there would be a general crackdown on all freedom of assembly to prevent, such an armed conflict. So there would be a huge, political repression. Or the right wing and the fascists would just win. And neither of those things are desirable. I don't want the fascists to win, and I don't want a general crackdown. Now is not the time to escalate to a civil war. I'm sorry. Again, communists advocate a peaceful transition. Millions of Americans have no idea what we believe. Now is not the time. That is the last thing any rational person would ever be wanting to do, is to spark or incite a civil war in the United States right now. That would be the dumbest thing you could do, right? Escalating a civil war, escalating tensions in the USA to the point of civil war, not a good thing. So why are Antifa doing that? I think Antifa are the foot soldiers of big capital. And that, yeah, they do want a general clamp down, right? They want to create an atmosphere where there's a lot less freedom of speech on the internet and in public assembly, etc. And by responding to right-wingers with violence, by escalating into street fighting and violence and confrontations where people get killed, they are creating an atmosphere where it can be justified for there to be a clamp down on all dissident activity. And that's generally what they want. But people are generally not going to be okay with that. We believe in free speech. We believe in freedom of assembly. But we don't. But if people are killing each other, right? Look, after January 6th, right, the right wing was very, very violent and attacked the Capitol. Now there's all this domestic terrorism legislation, right? Well, by escalating things, right, you can create a situation where people support a bigger crackdown. And that's not what we need. We need more political space. We need more political debate. We need real socialism to be part, to be part of the discourse. So there you go. All right. How do we prevent stagnation in a socialist USA? Well, I've said many times that one of the problems in the old Soviet Union was that everything was run by the government. And I believe that in the socialist United States, we will have, a big market sector. We'll have cooperatives, we'll have private hotels, private restaurants, tech firms, and a lot of these private businesses will get government funding and government support. But we will have a market sector, right? And that, yes, you can't have everything be run by the government. You need a market sector in 21st century socialism. All right, socialism in Libya post-Gaddafi. Well, I'm sure you're aware of, there's the general, and then, Buhari bans Twitter in Nigeria, uses social media to start problems in other countries. All right, okay. Buhari bans Twitter in Nigeria. All right. Socialism in Libya post-Gaddafi. Well, look, there's the division in Libya. There's the general that runs one half of the country. There's the other government that's in the other part. There's Turkish forces there, and it's a mess. And I don't see a big socialist movement. I mean, Gaddafi's son is very popular, and I mean, he has a following, the son of Gaddafi. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is very popular, but yeah, I really don't. I mean, the situation in Libya, I mean, the country's been blown apart. There's sectarian division. There's terrorist groups there. There's two rival governments. It's a mess. All right. Are leftists too harsh on libertarians? No, they're not harsh enough, right? I don't get how libertarianism is tolerated. Libertarians, they repeat all kinds of vicious anti-communist lies. They put forward an ideology that says, that might makes right, and that, read Ayn Rand, it's evil. And a lot of leftists say, oh, well, at least they're not fascists, right? Or, it's like a lot of leftists seem to think libertarian, they're like half leftists, right? They want to legalize weed. They have a sinister ideology that is opposed to human solidarity, that thinks, cooperation and altruism is weakness and needs to be weeded out. And people think, oh, well, they want to legalize weed and they want abortion to be legal, so I guess they're not so bad. No, libertarians are not half good and half bad. Libertarianism is a sinister, evil ideology. Everything a libertarians assume about socialists is true about ultra-leftism. How do we end the stigma of left adventurism? I don't even know. Okay. I think we should stigmatize left adventurism. I think that we shouldn't advocate left adventurism. So I don't want to end the stigma. All right. Is Slovoj Žižek a tanky? No. He says some weird things, like he likes Stalin. He'll say that Stalin was good from like a Freudian perspective. He's very anti-China. He says that, the socialist revolutions of Eastern Europe. I went and saw his movie in the theater, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. At the end of the movie, he says, the problem of our time, I can snort, right? Because I'm Zizek. The problem of our time, snort, is that communism was meant to address the problems of modern capitalism, but communism just make things worse. And it's like, no, communism didn't make things worse. That's a lie. But that's how his movie ends, with Occupy Wall Street, and they're playing, like, Beethoven, and it's, the problem of our time is that communism that was meant to address the problem only make things worse. Maybe now is the time to revive economic demands for housing, healthcare. That's how the movie ends. It's like, no, he's not a tanky. Definitely not a tanky. All right. Worker co-op weapons manufacturers. Exactly, Natalie. That's what we got to do. Clearly, private worker cooperatives that function for profits is the answer, right? We should just have Raytheon and General Electric all be worker cooperatives. That way all the workers will want there to be war. Because, and why don't we have, prisons for profit, right? Why don't have all the guards collectively own the private prisons? I bet Vosh would love that, right? And charter schools too. Let's make the charter schools, right? Let's make the charter schools where they get, they're breaking the public sector unions and privatizing education. Let's make the charter schools, all the teachers, instead of getting a paycheck, they all just get a chunk of whatever the government, pays to the charter school. Yeah, that's great. Cooperative capitalism. God damn, how can people, this is so dumb, right? All the problems that we associate with capitalism are rooted in the drive of capitalists making profits and that not lining up with public good. And if you make all the workers in the company into the capitalists, they're still driving to make profits. So, it doesn't solve the problem. Making Raytheon and General Electric and Boeing into cooperatives is not a good thing. Plus, the labor movement has fought vehemently against peace wages, right? Peace wages, right? They've demanded that every worker get an hourly wage. An hourly wage, for goodness sakes, right? That it used to be, some factory owners would say, okay, well, today, you make tires. So today I needed you to make 14 tires, so you get paid for 14 tires. Oh, you came in Monday and you were here all day, but I only needed 10 tires that day. So you only get paid for 10. No, that's called a peace wage. The labor movement has fought vehemently that everyone get an hourly salary, an hourly wage, on a minimum hourly wage. That no, they're not allowed to pay you for how much you produce only, right? Any bonus, any incentive pay has to come on top of a set hourly wage, right? Well, the worker cooperative people, they want to get rid of that. They don't want that. No, they want, they, instead of getting a wage, all the employees to be like, oh, well, you're a co-owner of the restaurant and no one came into the restaurant today. So instead of getting minimum wage for being a waiter and waiting around, you get nothing because no one came into our restaurant today. I mean, how's that improving workers' lives? Oh, well, no one came into the restaurant today. No, if you're a worker and nobody comes into the restaurant and you're a waiter, you should still get paid. And the labor movement has fought very, very hard to make sure you still get paid even if no one comes into the restaurant, right? So, yeah, the worker co-op thing, okay, worker cooperatives, worker co-ownership, it can be good. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it's not socialism because it doesn't eliminate the profit motive. All right, and Buhari bans Twitter in Nigeria. Look, Buhari, he was the military dictator during the 1980s, right? He was a dictator. I mean, he was like the military dictator. Now he's back in power. Good luck, Jonathan. Was voted out. He won. I was hoping he would be better. I was excited when he first got elected, but wrong. I mean, he was awful. I mean, he's not been a good leader, right? He really hasn't been. And it seems like, there is big division. And, Nigeria is a very, very big country. There's a big gap between the rich and poor. There's a lot of billionaires in Nigeria, but, there's also a lot of very, very, very poor people. And, there's, the Muslims and the Christians have been incited against each other many times, ethnic divisions. There's the whole Biafra situation where Biafra wants to be separate. I don't talk about my job on here. But there's that. I guess for some reason, Buhari probably believes that Twitter is being used against him. And because of that, he has taken this move. And it's a Bonapartist move for sure. And I think he's trying to see if he can get away with it. And we shall see. I mean, look, we shall see. I mean, Nigeria is the top oil-producing country on the African continent. Now that Libya has been bombed to shreds, it's a deeply poor country. There are fights among the bourgeoisie in Nigeria. Buhari represents the Nigerian military, and he's a Muslim, whereas Goodluck Jonathan was a Christian and was a little more with the civilian sector. So there you go. I mean, and we shall see if he gets away with this, right? Is this just a temporary ban? Is it permanent? We shall see. I mean, we'll just have to see. I'm curious to see if he gets away with this. What will be the results of this, right? Australia, you'll recall, has been fighting with Facebook. Governments around the world are pushing back against Silicon Valley. And they're right to challenge it on some level. I mean, I'm not saying that banning Twitter is the right thing in Nigeria, but they're right to question the power. Who said? Come on, man. You want me to talk shit about somebody? Come on. I know who that is. That's leader of PSL. I've talked about PSL at length here, but I'm not going to get personal. Come on, man. But anyway, governments are right to push back against Silicon Valley. Governments are right to push back against Silicon Valley. They're right to push back against Silicon Valley. But at the same time, we'll see what happens, right? This is a Bonapartist move by Buhari, and we'll just have to see. All right, folks, I apologize for all the sniffing tonight. My allergies are really getting me today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families, Fusion City now, and build the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor. All right. Good night, folks. Good night.